Hi everyone, I'm Neama Rahmani, and here are the updates on the Idaho murders case. As expected, the state of Idaho is seeking the death penalty for Bryan Kohberger. This was something that we thought was happening because the defense lawyers in the case asked for funding for an additional death penalty qualified lawyer. So this is something they probably saw coming. And of course, Ann Taylor, who is the public defender on the case, is the only death penalty qualified lawyer in northern Idaho. She, of course, famously represented the parents of some of the victims in the case. So people thought there might be a conflict, but she said that her office represented them, not her personally. Now, the victims aren't happy in the case for a number of reasons. Of course, we're dealing with the broadest gag order that we've seen in any case. Normally, gag orders will cover the parties and the attorneys, but in this case, it's covering the victims as well. And although courts have typically upheld these types of gag orders, you don't really see it when it comes to victims. But because the victims in the case, and by victims I mean the victims' parents, may actually be witnesses in the penalty phase of the trial. Obviously, they weren't there. They probably won't have much to say in terms of the murders themselves. But if Kohberger is convicted, you're going to expect to see the parents testify about the loss of their children during the death penalty part of the phase. So for that reason, the judge says, hey, you're not only victims, but because you may be witnesses, we're going to prevent you from talking about the case. The media outlets are litigating this issue, and it's still up on appeal, but I think, unfortunately, for members of the public like us who want information, that gag order will stay. On a somewhat related note, the question is, will cameras be allowed in the courtroom? And if you're judging by a recent Idaho case, which was Lori Vallow, the Doomsday Cult mom, the defense successfully argued against cameras in the courtroom. And I think, given how the lawyers in this case have been very aggressive in litigating pretrial publicity issues, they're the ones who asked for the gag order. So I think Kohberger's lawyers are going to be successful in keeping cameras out of the courtroom in this case. But it's just a guess. We'll see. I, of course, would love for there to be cameras because I'll be doing live trial commentary on this case. Speaking of the gag order, it's been very hard to get information in this case. You know, we're getting bits and pieces from some of the court filings, especially some of the discovery motions, but we haven't really seen the evidence that the prosecution has because they're unable to disclose it. We thought that there was a possibility that a lot of this would come out during the preliminary hearing in the case. So whenever you're dealing with a felony trial, one of two things has to happen before you can get to a jury. You either have to have a preliminary hearing, which is a mini trial before the trial. It's before the judge. The same rules of evidence don't apply. But this is something, for instance, that we saw in the OJ case where the state has to present their case. And it's a low standard. It's just probable cause. And a judge needs to determine whether there's enough evidence to go forward. You don't need a jury. You don't need to get to beyond a reasonable doubt. The other way to get to a felony jury trial is to get a grand jury indictment. And that's what happened here. The only problem with a grand jury indictment is those proceedings are secret. Members of the public aren't there. Even the defense isn't there. It's just the prosecutor and the grand jurors. So because the state proceeded by grand jury indictment, we don't have a lot of the evidence in the case. You know, we know that there's that single source of DNA. Obviously, we heard about the cell site evidence and how it turned off. And who could, of course, forget the infamous white Hyundai Elantra that really the surveillance video broke this case and led everyone at Kohberger. But we don't have a lot of information as to what was found at Kohberger's apartment or his office or his car or his parents' home. The defense is saying there's not much evidence there, so we'll see if that's true or not. And you know, where we are right now, it's the discovery phase of the case. The defense is aggressively going after the investigating officers. They want their training records. They want any records of misconduct. So I can see them put on a very aggressive case here because if you believe their side of the case, there's not as much evidence as you would typically see in a murder scene that's this gruesome. Speaking of the murder scene, the victims' families want the home preserved. It's really a question of what the parties want. You know, victims do have rights in every state, including the state of Idaho. But when you're dealing with issues of evidence and preservation of evidence, and of course, the murder scene is evidence, it's going to be up to the judge and the parties to decide whether that scene needs to be preserved. If I'm the state of Idaho, I would like the home preserved because I would want to take the jurors there. It's very powerful for them to see the scene of the crime. Thanks everyone for watching. Please make sure to like, follow, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications because we're going to be covering this case a lot more in the coming weeks and months.